Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
Canada is resilient. Canada is resourceful. Canadians are resourceful people. So together, we can chart a path forward to the fog of uncertainty. We have the right plan. We're building big. We're moving fast. And the good news, Mr. Speaker, we're just getting started.
That's Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne presenting the Spring Economic Update in the House of Commons yesterday. The federal government typically gives these updates between its annual budgets to revise its fiscal spending and announce new investments. These, of course, are not typical times. The government says that in the face of war and tariffs, Canada's economic prospects are stronger than expected. The deficit for 2025-26 is $11.5 billion less than originally projected. The government is also putting $37 billion toward new measures to be rolled out over the next 6 years.
Team Canada Strong will empower a new generation of workers to help build the local infrastructure the government is investing in. Whether that means homes, sport facilities, or transit system, these projects will be built by workers in our communities for our communities.
Catherine Cullen is the host of CBC Radio's The House. She is in Ottawa. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Happy Spring Economic Update Day +1 to you.
It is a great day in this year. What is the story that the government is trying to tell Canadians with this update?
I think that word resilience that we heard the finance minister use there is a big part of what the government hopes the story is here. There is a plan going forward. I will say we've become accustomed to these updates being sometimes a kind of a mini budget, really heavy on new programs and new spending. There really is only one big new marquee program to come out of this. The finance minister referenced it in that clip a minute ago, the skilled trades planning. Mm-hmm. But that does fit into Mark Carney's bigger vision. I would argue it's actually a pretty important piece of this plan to bring Canada forward. So times of uncertainty, the deficit number, while smaller, is still a big one. But what the government, I think, is trying to communicate to Canadians is a sort of, we are still charting a path forward in the midst of this uncertainty. And things are going, all things considered, all right. That's what the government would hope to communicate.
I don't know whether the government trademarked the phrase Canada Strong, but you have the Canada Strong Fund. You now have Team Canada Strong. This is this $6 billion investment in skilled trades, training up to, 100,000 skilled workers by 2030, 2031. What is, as the government is pitching it, what is the value of this in the broader economic picture?
Well, I actually think if you talk about it in the value of what Mark Carney wants to do with this country, this is not a nice to have. This is not a nice sort of retail politics. Ooh, look good paying jobs. While that may be a benefit, this is a need to have for what Mark Carney wants to do. There are not, and we have been hearing this for years, there are not enough workers, and particularly skilled workers in this country, to meet the demands around the housing crisis. We're actually going to get these houses built. We need more construction workers. We need more skilled trade workers. And of course, building more houses is a big part of Mark Carney's agenda. Build Canada homes. It gets tough to keep track of all the buzzwords at some point. But all the major project building as well, right? New infrastructure. They want to build new community centers. They need people to do that. And the numbers that are quoted in this document itself speak to the problem that in 2024, 100,000 people went into apprenticeships in the skilled trades. 34,000 completed those apprenticeships, right? So the completion rate just isn't there. There aren't enough people. People are also retiring from the skilled trades. They need a really big uptake if Mark Carney wants to complete his bigger vision for this country. And how are they going to do that? Well, frankly, they're going to throw money at it to help incentivize both the businesses themselves and young people who might want to go into the skilled trades to stick around. Some money to help them get through the apprenticeship process.
We'll certainly be talking about this in the days ahead. What else in sifting through what is it, 167-page document, or maybe more or less than that? But what else stood out to you in this update? Beyond, there are some big ticket announcements, but beyond that?
I would say that, I know you've talked about it before on the show, let's just say watch this space on the Canada Sovereign Wealth Fund. There are still a lot of questions about what is going to be in there, but there's also a lot of interesting smaller pieces. The government and the finance minister acknowledged this on Power and Politics yesterday, is interested in privatizing Canadian airports, perhaps, as a means of dealing with assets.
That would unlock money. Is that the sense?
That is his vision. He talks about what was done in the UK and in Australia, where the airport privatization took place in the 1990s. A question of how they would use the money from those assets. And the finance minister was clear. It's not really just airports. There's other pieces of infrastructure that they've put a lot of money, federal governments have put a lot of money into over the years. So is there a way to get some money out of them? But then, of course, I think as regular Canadians, we also wonder, what are the consequences if this is infrastructure we use? How might it affect our experience in there? Another thing that probably, I don't know if it's going to get a lot of attention, but I have to say personally, this was one thing that stood out. The Canada Disability Tax Credit, that's something that was introduced under Justin Trudeau. The idea initially, when the Liberals started talking about this, they were going to lift people out of poverty, disabled Canadians who are disproportionately facing difficult economic circumstances below the poverty line. They're going to make it easier to access. And that was certainly clearly, we were hearing from all corners, a problem around that. So something that even Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre complimented the government on. We all know that Mr. Poilievre is not exactly fast and loose with his compliments towards Mark Carney's government, but said thank you for doing that. And also banning crypto ATMs, I thought was an interesting one. Our colleagues at CBC Toronto have done some excellent work pointing to how these so-called ATMs are being used in essentially in fraud and crimes, and so getting rid of those wholesale.
You mentioned Mr. Poilievre. He had no good words to say about the scale, the size of the federal deficit. Yes, it's down from $78.3 billion last year to around $67 billion. What is the sense from the finance minister as to what is driving the decrease in the deficit, but also the fact that it's still a large number?
Well, I mean, the government, Mark Carney said on Monday, it's because we're such excellent fiscal managers. So that's what the government would like to communicate. Economists that I spoke to in the lockup said, listen, that may be an element here. We have to acknowledge part of this story is about oil prices, certainly, right? We all think of our own experience at the pumps, how it's adding to the cost of the various things we purchase. We think of the economic pain we associate with higher price in oil, but it leads to higher government revenue. So that is certainly part of the picture. And also just a little bit more economic resilience and stability. GDP, this is the deficit for the last fiscal year, GDP was a bit higher than was initially predicted. So it's a little bit of that economic good news has given the government a boost up. And I will say our colleague Peter Armstrong has a piece this morning about how they're probably underestimating the cost of oil going forward, which means there might be a little bit more expectation management, good news, as it were, a little bit more room to play when it comes around to the fall budget, which you can now start counting down to on your calendar, Matt. I mean, we don't know exactly when it is.
Well, expectation management in terms of the excitement around that fall budget as well. I mean, the deficit is going to go up, right? Because the Liberals have made these big promises around deficit spending, around these nation-building projects. Pierre Poilievre says this is a credit card budget in some ways. Where are we, even when it comes to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is there a sense in this fiscal update as to how the government plans to pay for all of this?
Well, the deficit will, according to the government's projections, the idea is that it will continue to go down. And then, of course, there's this debate about like capital versus operational spending. I'm not sure this is the place to get into it. But I mean, it is a mixed answer. Yes, Mark Carney's vision is that he wants to grow Canada's economy. He's been soliciting all this foreign investment as he's been traveling around the world and as the economy grows and as some of the spending around, for instance, the size of government comes down, we get to a place of better balance. But you talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, $25 billion over 3 years. There were not answers in this document yesterday to how it was going to be paid for. The finance minister was asked repeatedly by reporters in the lockup, and there's quite a bit of like, well, there's more information here than you had yesterday. That's not entirely clear to me. This will become clear in the fullness of time. That the answer is, it sounds like debt. Either it's selling those assets like airports and there's some sort of plan there, but the government is also willing to go further into debt. Like, yes, the deficit has gone down significantly for the last fiscal year, $11.5 billion. You'd take it. I'd take it, Matt. It's nothing to sneeze at. It's still a big deficit. I mean, Pierre Poilievre likes to point out that it is much bigger than the last deficit Justin Trudeau put forward. So the numbers that we're talking about here are very substantial. Mark Carney is trying to sell that to Canadians by pitching it as an investment in Canada's future.
Two quick things before I let you go. One is it's the 29th of April, end of the month. And so people have bills to pay, rent due, taxes due. Is there any sense in this update as to how the government plans to address the day-to-day experience for many people?
The things that speak to affordability were by and large already announced before this. So the cut, the big ones we would think about, the cut in the price of the fuel tax is something the government announced recently. And again, it was boosting their coffers. So they're putting some of that money back in the hands of people who are paying at the gas pumps. There's also the groceries and essentials rebate, so such branded from the government, that's supposed to help low and middle income Canadians. That money still is yet to arrive in people's pockets, so or in their bank accounts, as it were. But not another big affordability measure. A little cut on the Canadian pension plan premiums. That might be, let's say, $100 back in people's pockets, depending on their income over the course of a year. But the government basically argued we have a whole suite of affordability measures, some of the best in the G7, but we have to be prudent. In essence, they have to draw the line somewhere.
Got to let you go, but it was interesting. At the beginning of our conversation, we played that clip of Minister Champagne in the House, and one of the things he talked about was the fog of uncertainty. How does this, and that fog that we are all living in now, how does this set up the stage for what may be unveiled in the fall budget?
I would say a little bit of that expectation management, that wiggle room, that may well be important given the unending, I don't know, are we emerging from the fog of uncertainty? I think we feel like we're just stumbling into different parts of the woods. I might be starting to torture the metaphor here, but there's some room to maneuver in the future, perhaps, with regards to the price of oil. But the truth is, we all know we're living through one unexpected shock after another. And the government is trying to impress upon Canadians that they are trying to manage that time, while the opposition parties say you could have been doing more to help folks out with it.
You are a great guide through this fog. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Catherine Cullen, the host of The House on CBC Radio. She was in Ottawa. With the federal government saying that it's making those big investments to build the Canadian economy, we wanted to hear from Canadians about how you feel about this country's financial situation, what worries you day to day. And so the Current's Ann Penman spoke with people in Vancouver yesterday.
Gas is atrocious. Groceries are atrocious. Everything's too expensive. Scraping would be the best terminology.
People making choices between rent and eating. Lots more people going to the food bank. We can't afford groceries, let alone even think about owning a home.
It feels like wages aren't really going up to reflect the rise in prices, but I feel like I would like to see better distribution of wealth and care.
I think the economy for everybody is not great. You're just worried about money all the time, and I think that we're always looking at our bank account and always figuring out where we need to tighten up and things like that.
Sahir Khan is Canada's former Assistant Parliamentary Budget Officer, co-founder of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Is in our Ottawa studio this morning. Sahir, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
You heard that uncertainty. A lot of people are very worried about the times we're in. Does this update from the federal government, kind of a look under the hood at the state of the Canadian economy, does it meet the moment?
I think it does in a way that keeps things fiscally sustainable for the federal government. I think there's a recognition that this update was more than just a stock taking of where we are in terms of the big geopolitical risks and the fiscal situation. When you look at the measures, Catherine talked about the $37 billion, almost $28 billion of that was towards households, to workers, relief at the pumps and the grocery benefit. So, for a government that's been really focused on capital investments, closing the investment gap, dealing with the trade uncertainty.
These big picture kind of ideas.
Yeah. And so you see an update that otherwise would have been a very short technical document ends up dealing with the affordability issue kind of head on. But it did so in a way that I think allowed them to show, a declining deficit, at least for the next year, and a sustainable fiscal track for the balance of the 5-year forecast horizon.
What do you make of this plan to train 100,000 Canadians in the skilled trades? These are big, good-paying jobs. We need them, as we've heard from Catherine, if we as a nation want to build. What do you make of that initiative?
Yeah. I think it's actually really important for a couple of reasons. One is that, we've seen some of these moves at the provincial level, particularly in Ontario, to develop skilled trades to kind of meet the needs of the economy. The second thing is that, as immigration kind of gets pared back, that's labor force supply that I think we were counting on starts to dry up a little bit. So we need homegrown talent. And at the same time, I think it addresses some of the anxiety of young people. Not only can we get them into well-paying jobs, but get them trained and see them through their apprenticeship. And all of a sudden, you're building kind of a homegrown workforce and solving maybe more than one problem at a time. For me, the most important thing is having, two orders of government actually start to coordinate policy action together, which tends to get better outcomes. But I think
the feds and the
provinces, pulling in the same direction, because I don't think you can just have a federal decision on this without having colleges and apprenticeship programs and which largely exists at the provincial level, kind of working in sync.
Do you have concerns around how programs like this will be paid for?
I think overall we do. I think this, if you believe that Canada was at a hinge moment in October or November with the budget, things did get worse. So I think we have to look at the long-term sustainability, fiscal sustainability in that context. I think the other reason why, it probably wasn't a good time to really pare back spending is that, the economy is still soft. There's we call it an output gap. The economy is not operating at its full potential. Not a great time to kind of pull back on spending, right? And so I think, you want to be really targeted to the extent that you're temporary in your measures. So you look at the grocery benefit. These are initiatives that are kind of doing 1 year at a time. It's very different than having a permanent social program, billions of dollars a year, demographically sensitive towards an aging population. That kind of stuff puts long-term fiscal sustainability at risk. We're a lot better off when the measures are targeted and temporary. And I think we're seeing a lot of that from this government.
The Conservatives would disagree. The deficit, as we've been talking about, was lower than the government projected last fall, but it's still at $67 billion. Federal debt going up to $1.4 trillion this year. Have a listen to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
Outside of COVID, last year's was the largest deficit in Canadian history, and this year's spending is the highest as a share of GDP since 1996. Interest on the national debt will hit $59 billion this year, more than we transfer for health care and more than we collect in GST.
Do you share his concerns?
I'm not sure I share the same level of concern. I think it has to be a recognition of how we got here. A lot of this debt was accumulated during COVID, and it was an unprecedented event, an unprecedented response where the federal government kind of used a lot of its available fiscal room. So that's one reason why we got here. And then as Catherine kind of alluded to, then we had one crisis after another. It's actually why you have fiscal space. So I'm kind of on the side of you use your fiscal strategy to try to solve problems, but you want to stay sustainable. So Matt, when bond rating agencies look at Canada, they're not just looking at the macroeconomic and fiscal dimensions. They're also looking at the health of our public pensions and the stability of our institutions. And we're the only AAA-rated country apart from Germany and the G7. And so, in a lot of measures, we're doing better than our peers. So this is not just a made-in-Canada problem. So I think we have to take the context into account before we just look at a number. When you look at kind of the deficit to GDP numbers over the forecast horizon, they're going to now dip below 2% and then get to 1.4% at the end. And mind you, the government will probably spend in that interim period. But, compare that to the United States that's operating at 7%, its deficit to GDP. So, some context is warranted, I think, in this analysis, and the federal government remains fiscally sustainable, but I think we want to see discipline. I actually really think the issue here is that execution risk is going to dominate fiscal risk going forward. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister need results out of this spending if we're going to get a productive economy that generates jobs and income for Canadians.
We just have a minute or so left. Let me end with where I ended with Catherine, and that is that idea of the fog of uncertainty, the times we're living in right now. Do you have a sense as to where we're going?
I wish I did, Matt. I think there is uncertainty, and like I said, if we thought there was uncertainty last fall, there's more of it now. If we are a resilient economy, and I think we're dealing with an oil shock where we have the good fortune of being a net oil exporter, that doesn't mean that everybody benefits the same way. Oil-producing provinces will benefit significantly. The federal government will from a revenue perspective. But industries that have oil as an input and households will struggle. And so I think you're going to need the federal government to provide support for those that are not going to benefit from this oil shock. So, those are nuanced issues. And I think the government's going to have to now keep explaining what it's doing, how it's doing, and what results it's achieving, because that's going to be kind of at the basis of confidence of Canadians going forward.
Sahir, good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Matt.
Sahir Khan is co-founder of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. He was in our Ottawa studio. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.